people talked about it for years from the aspect of like people want to follow other people, not necessarily companies. Right. And I think that's more true today than it's ever been in history, right? So we've obviously seen all the companies you just mentioned, Barstool, Pat, kind of Dan Le Batard's new venture and all of that have done really well just based off of that, right? Like people just want to follow personalities. They can connect with them better. They understand their point of view. They're opinionated, right? So you had John Boy on, and I listened to it a while ago, and he was perfect in the sense where he was like, dude, look, I'm very open. I'm a Yankees fan.
What is up, everyone? This is episode 11, and today we are talking the business side of Joe Pompliano. And if you're on Twitter and you like sports, you've probably seen Joe's work. He's gone from 0 to 250,000 followers in less than a year, breaking down the business of sports. And when you think about it, the business of sports should be an absolutely massive category. On one hand, you have sports, which is obviously a massive passion point. On the other hand, you have business, which, again, massive. So if you combine the two, it should be this category that's exploding. But it really hasn't. For the most part, it's lived behind industry paywalls, Sports Business Journal, and kind of kept in its own industries. Joe changed that by bringing sports business to where the audience is actually consuming it, Twitter. So he has these Twitter threads where he breaks down a sports business story in, 8 to 10 different tweets. And by building it in that digestible form, he's really been able to get a ton of traction. His newsletter, Huddle Up, is exploding. He's just done really, really well, and I think it's a new spin on a space for a category that really has been nascent for too long. We also hit on two reoccurring themes that have come up a lot on this podcast. One, the shift from institutions, in this case ESPN, Fox Sports, to personalities like Joe. This shift is happening, and Joe is a great example of that. The second is how technology, particularly Twitter and Substack, have enabled this shift to happen. So without these tools, I don't know if Joe would be able to do what Joe is doing. All right, that is the intro. Before we jump back into the episode, though, two things. First, make sure to follow Joe on Twitter. Make sure to subscribe to his newsletter, Huddle Up. For me, it's just a small ask. If you're on Apple, please give me that 5-star review. Please subscribe to the podcast. If you're on Spotify, smash that follow button. And to my beautiful YouTube audience, keep on doing what you're doing. Subscribe, like, comment, tell me how good looking I am. All of this stuff means a ton. Okay, I'll leave you now. Let's get into the episode. I'm kind of mad at you, dude. I just want to start out with, I'm kind of pissed off at you.
I can't wait to hear why.
So the audience doesn't know this, obviously, but I don't know, maybe a year ago, you and Pomp were talking on the phone. I feel like a big shot. I'm giving you pointers on how to do things. Okay, well, this is how maybe you get a brand deal. This is how you do this. And you had what, 20,000 followers at the time?
Yeah, probably around there. I had just started, really, like probably a month or two in. 2 months, 3 months.
So you're a month or two in, and I was feeling I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm with the Pomps. I'm adding value. And then I look at your Twitter profile when I'm preparing for this interview. I may have been following you, and you have 185,000 Twitter followers.
Yeah.
Do you know how much that sucks to be me, who just has been grinding for 4 years on this thing, and then fucking Joe Pomp comes in and now has 185,000 followers?
Well, look, I will. The one thing I'm very clear about is I obviously had some help, right? Like I don't think. I don't think this would obviously be possible without kind of leveraging Anthony's distribution, for sure. But like you said, right, like this has been my job for 6-7 months now. So when I quit JP Morgan, and maybe we can get into some of that, but like I quit JP Morgan in September, and I've been head down just trying to build a following now for 6 months, right? So that's kind of been the result, which is kind of like the good, but kind of under the surface has been a lot of work, obviously, with the threads and kind of all the other stuff.
But you have to know there's this Twitter audience of people like me who just see the fucking Pomps on Twitter, just dominating Twitter, and it's just like, these motherfuckers.
We are more aware than anyone, trust me. We understand that people do not like it, that people hate it, whatever it might be.
No. I wouldn't go that far. It's more just, you guys are doing really well.
You haven't seen the comments or the DMs yet.
Listen, I saw you guys kind of get into it. We don't have to go there, but I love it when you guys clap back at someone who makes fun of like a thread. That I enjoy a lot. So let's start. So you're at JP Morgan. What possessed you to say, all right, there's an opportunity for sports business? Like, what was your mindset going into it?
Yeah, so maybe we can even go a step back, right? Like just from the earliest stage. For those that don't know, I have four brothers. We grew up playing kind of every sport you can imagine, right? Basketball, football, baseball, kind of like, you would assume five brothers did. So I always had kind of like a passion for sports growing up. We didn't watch the news growing up, right? Like we watched SportsCenter. So that was kind of always in me. When I went to college, I had an internship at Octagon Sports Agency, which was kind of one of the largest sports agencies in the world. And I loved it. It was awesome. I worked on the digital team. But when I was done with that, I went back for senior year. And what I found out was like, it's just really hard to get into sports in general as a career, right? So, anyone who's tried it certainly knows that for sure. And then the agent route is even harder, right? Like you can go in the mailroom. If you know someone, maybe you'll get a job in the mailroom somewhere.
So it's funny you say it. So I worked at Wasserman. And
okay, cool.
How I got in at Wasserman was I interned. I thought I had a job at Wasserman in the Olympics division. It fell through. And it was so hard to get in sports. I tricked my boss into thinking I was a second cousin, got the job, and then when I ultimately didn't get a full-time job, I said, I'll intern for you for 6 months and I'll live at my grandma's. Because breaking into sports it's impossible. So
that's what you have. Well, that's what you have to do, though, right? So like that story doesn't surprise me at all. And it came down to basically like, all right, I'm graduating. I had an opportunity to go work in New York. I ended up at JP Morgan. I spent a couple of years there, right? Like it was obviously a great job and I really enjoyed it and appreciated it and everything like that. But at some point it was just kind of like, I didn't see myself doing that long term. It wasn't something that I could look back when I'm 40, 45, 50 and be like, okay, this is, I'm really enjoying this. So I think I always wanted to get back to sports in some way. And then when you look at it from the standpoint of kind of like the landscape of sports and sports business specifically, I just thought there was a really big opportunity from a personality standpoint in sports business, right? So there's obviously people like Darren Rovell. Everyone knows Darren, right? He's got a massive following, 2 million plus, and he does it really, really well. But for a younger generation, no one's really filling that void, right? So when I looked at that, I knew I had one inherent advantage, which was obviously kind of distribution from day one if I was doing a good job and could get good content out. So it was like, how do I leverage that?
Because your brother is the crypto... I don't know. How would you describe? I mean, anyone who's listening to this knows Anthony, but how would you describe what he does?
I don't even know. I mean, most of it is like, I'd say 50% of his time, which everyone probably thinks is 100% of his time, is the content business, which is tweeting and the newsletter and stuff like that. Sure. But he obviously, he does investing and all that kind of stuff the other 50% of the time. But yeah, it's mostly in the crypto space predominantly. He's one of the loudest voices on Twitter, I would imagine. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, look, I knew that was an advantage coming in, right? I know that at the time, I want to say he probably had maybe 350,000 followers. So he's actually even growing at a faster rate, which is incredible because I think he's over 700 now. So that was obviously kind of like a built-in advantage from day one. And then I looked at it and I was like, look, if I can build up a following, I think there's a way to monetize this pretty quickly through a newsletter, advertisements, et cetera. And then I can move to different platforms, whether it's YouTube, podcasts, et cetera. And that was really the game plan, and that's what I did, right? So I started in July, and people will laugh, but like the newsletter was it's completely different than it was at first. At first, it was just me sharing articles that I thought were cool in sports, right? So I think it's funny sometimes to look back and hear people talk about the first iteration of what they're doing now, and that was certainly kind of funny now. But yeah, I started writing about sports business a couple weeks after that, started tweeting about it, and I was able to build up enough following and kind of subscribers by September, so 2 or 3 months later, to convince an advertiser to go full-time and basically replace salary-wise similar to what I was making. And for me, that was a no-brainer, right? Because some people do it on much, much less and kind of much less security for sure. So when I was given the opportunity to kind of double down and just bet on myself per se, I took them up on it for sure.
Yeah, I remember that was our initial conversation was how do I quit my job, but in a way where I'm not, probably facing a rent and all these different life expenses that comes with being a content creator. And what I thought was really interesting about how you approached it was, which is very similar to actually how advertisers want to look at deals, was, okay, can I work with somebody for 6 months? And at the beginning of the 6 months, I'm probably getting maybe a better deal where my distribution is going like this. So they're making a bet long term. By the end, they're getting a good deal because you are now bigger than what they bought. I thought that was a very maybe financial way of looking at it. That's how I book deals, but I thought that was a smart way to think of how am I going to establish this runway to do content creation.
Yeah, and it's funny you say it that way because that's exactly how we pitched it, and that's exactly how they looked at it also. So The deal was with Athletic Brewing, and basically the CEO there, Bill, he worked on Wall Street prior to his position there and founding Athletic Brewing, and he looked at it the same way. He's like, dude, look, I'm aware it's going to be a pretty good deal for you for the first 2 to 3 months, but if your growth rates kind of continue where they're going right now, we're going to get a great deal for the last 4, 5, and 6 months. And that's really what it ended up being. And at the end of the day, it was like, dude, you took a chance on me. Like, we're going to make sure it's worth it. You'll get kind of the sales and the stuff you need. And it ended up being a great partnership.
So the second thing is, and it's more of a macro point, but when I was at Wasserman, you'd walk into their offices and you'd look at the desk, and it would just be these things called Sports Business Journal, which everybody in the industry reads religiously because they want to be 40 under 40. But sports business had just remained in such a confines. You had Darren, but it really never caught hold like the everyday person cares about sports business. Why do you think like it really was just an open opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because I think you're right in the fact that a lot of the publications, in my opinion, don't necessarily relate it really well to like the individual person, right? So they're still really hyper-focused on people that work in sports currently, and all the content and the information is kind of geared and pitched towards that way. And really what I try to do was just engage the average person, right? The person like me or you that's on Twitter that likes sports, cares about kind of the business side of it a little bit, right? They care about the money, but they don't necessarily want to get in the weeds of kind of the contracts or naming rights negotiations and TV deals and stuff like that, right? They really enjoy the high level stuff, and they care about it, but they don't necessarily want all the background noise. And I think Darren did a really good job at that, obviously, and that's to his credit how he's done really well and successful in his career. And for me, it was just like, how can I not only like pitch this to a younger generation, but like some of these stories that Darren was telling 20, 30 years ago are still awesome and relevant, right? And I think that's kind of how those threads picked up, right? So I was doing stories that Darren probably covered 20 years ago at ESPN, but at the same time, people that our age are... Go ahead.
So I got to know, does he jump in the DMs and say, I wrote the story a decade ago and it got X many page views,
yeah,
and then you tweet out the story and it has 6,000 retweets? Is he just like, you motherfucker?
So I give Darren a lot of shit all the time, but the one thing that I can't fuck with him about is like, he's the nicest dude. He like couldn't have been just more welcoming to me doing it, especially for someone like that was coming in and kind of doing something very similar to him, right? It's super Twitter focused. It's a lot of the same stories and content. Kind of the material and the way we put it out is very similar. And for someone that, like, a lot of people hate on him in his comments and stuff like that, right? So someone that could easily kind of give it back, he didn't do any of that at all. He was super nice. He retweeted the first 2 or 3 of them, right? So like I'd send him to him and be like, hey, look, check this out. You may enjoy it. And he's like, yeah, dude, I got you. And he would send it out.
How do you think about threading and the stories you pick? Like, walk me through that process.
Yeah, so it's evolved over time. So just back to square one, when I first started doing it, one day I basically was like, I was new to Twitter, right? So I don't think I really grasped the whole kind of how many people were doing threads, and I don't know if it's evolved over time and maybe more people are doing them now or whatnot. But when I first did it, I essentially just...
It's everyone's... No, but this is the thing. I'll say it because I want to say it. I think everyone likes to make fun of threads. I think some of them are pithy shit that pisses me off, and it's just like the best rule of thumb in business, work hard. It's like, all right, guy. Yeah. Now, I think your threads are actually... What's interesting is they tell a story the whole way through, and you can basically get a really interesting life story in a Twitter thread.
Yeah, and I think, right, like the most obvious way to look at it is people do them because they work, right? So if they're gaining people followers and it's the easiest way to give a call to action and subscribe or whatever it might be, they obviously work. So people have been doing them. But for me, it was, the first one I did was just a recap of my article. So I send out a newsletter every morning. I basically, after I was done with the newsletter, I would type it in a Twitter thread, very similar content. So the people that got the newsletter was kind of the same thing. But at first I was using it of just a way to attract people to the newsletter. And the first one I sent out, Anthony retweeted, right? And it goes to all these people. I get like 500 or so subscribers. I'm like, all right, this works, right? So once I found that was kind of like, I had been tweeting out links to the newsletter. I had been, doing basically everything you could imagine, posting on message boards, trying to get people to subscribe. And that was like the clear winner of like, yeah, this was like the clear winner of kind of the fastest way to grow.
It's like an attention funnel literally in a nutshell where, a lot of people, I'm trying to do this way where you use the Twitter following to build the podcast. You're using the Twitter following to build the newsletter, but you're quite literally in that thread as a funnel. I'm going to have a top line tweet that applies to everyone that gets my interest. By the time you're 6 tweets down your thread, I have you, and now it's your link is right there. Click to subscribe to my newsletter.
Yeah, you enjoyed this, you should subscribe. Everyone's like, okay, cool, right? Right, like once I noticed that was the best way to get subscribers, and I eventually iterated a little bit to optimize for followers, and then I realized later on, hey, I can tweet out the link and you guys might still subscribe, right? So I kind of do a combination of both, and I've mixed it around over time. But really what I did was just double down on that, right? So people make fun of it because really I was doing 4 to 5 a week for 6 months. So it was like, and
that's hard. Like how much time do you spend on those threads? Because it takes me to do a good thread, and I don't do them like you do them, but it takes me 2-3 hours of like wordsmithing, trying to figure out how I'm going to move you from one tweet to the next tweet. I know people make fun of it, but it does take a lot of work.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I think some of them take me longer than that, to be honest. Like I think some of them probably take 3 to 4 hours, maybe even 5.
Well, you're doing research.
That's the key part, right? The research can take a lot of time because, as you imagine, everyone on Twitter loves to point out your mistake if you make one. Obviously, I had the advantage of doing it full time as a job. So I was optimizing for that, and I was doing 4 to 5 a week. They were taking a long time, but that's what grew the Twitter, right? And that's what grew the newsletter. And I want to say over 90% of the subscribers have probably come from Twitter.
Is it crazy to think that, 5 years ago, that just like this career wouldn't really be possible the same way? One, I don't think Twitter was where it is today in terms of just like a medium that people quite to the same degree it is now. 2, Substack. 3, Athletic Brewing and a nuanced media buyer wasn't really there where they would understand that to the same degree they do now. And it's just a very interesting world to think of. Juxtapose Darren where he was, and he needed a publication. He needed ESPN to get his word out.
Yep.
And you don't have that same issue.
Yeah, to be honest, like I didn't even know it was possible a year ago, right? Like I think I surprised myself to some degree of kind of just starting and doing it, but you're exactly right. Like you can create a Twitter account, grow an audience, and monetize it through whether it's a newsletter, podcast, or whatever it might be. And you mentioned Pat McAfee before we got started. Like no one does it better than him, right? So a guy like him comes off the playing field in the NFL, and he instantly has one of the most powerful shows now in sports media, and that's all through YouTube and Twitter and et cetera, right? So he's kind of the perfect example, and I think like the blueprint of how it's done for sports media today for someone kind of like doing it on their own. But yeah, like there's just way more possibilities today than there would have been 2, 3, even 5 years ago.
And that gets into my next point. So when I was thinking this through, there's been this shift where you used to need that masthead, you used to need that logo, that 4 letters, ESPN or, I don't know, Fox or whatever to get your word out. And now it seems like we've shifted from you need that legitimacy, not only the legitimacy, but also distribution to a world where personalities are winning across the board. I think you wrote an article about Dan Le Batard. He's creating literally a creator, was it First media company? You have Pat McAfee, you have Barstool. Like you have these very personality-based media brands versus a world where ESPN and Fox, that was the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think, you probably know this more than anyone, but people talked about it for years from the aspect of like, people want to follow other people, not necessarily companies. Right. And I think that's more true today than it's ever been in history, right? So we've obviously seen all the companies you just mentioned, Barstool, Pat, kind of Dan Le Batard's new venture and all of that have done really well just based off of that, right? Like people just want to follow personalities. They can connect with them better. They understand their point of view. They're opinionated, right? So you had John Boy on, and I listened to it a while ago, and he was perfect in the sense where he was like, dude, look, I'm very open. I'm a Yankees fan, right? So it's like, like people don't care. If you're honest and you're open and you're authentic, people respect it and they like it. And I think when you're linked to a publication, like there's obvious benefits, right? Just the distribution and all that kind of stuff. And it legitimizes you to some instance. But I think like, you can get labeled to some degree, right? Depending on kind of how your institution or your legacy media company is viewed. When you're a personality, like that's all up to you, and you're kind of able to drive kind of the opinion on yourself.
Yeah, I always love it when someone accuses Pat McAfee of being a journalist because they obviously have never watched Pat McAfee. And I think in a world where everyone has just been so uptight, particularly sports media has been, where if you listen to the announcer of a game, it's just so down the middle. If you stray off that, you just get crushed. Where people are looking for people to actually have an opinion and acknowledge they are a fan of the sport they are watching, which is like pretty obvious concept. And I think what's interesting about you is it just never, Darren did it, but Darren did it in a very Darren way. And I love Darren, but he did it in a very Darren way. I think if you think about just how popular business is, like just CNBC and the whole business world, which is also getting disrupted, there's this massive opportunity for sports business that just makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, and the way I like to look at it is, people love talking about how successful you can be when you pick a niche and you kind of go in and build a media publication or a media company off of that. But as much as people consider probably sports business to be a niche, it's combining two of the biggest kind of market categories there are, right? So sports is obviously massive, business is obviously massive. So the combination of them both, it's like, hey, there's a huge overlap between the two. So I think that's obviously been helpful. It's not nearly as niche as people believe. And even just the casual fan, right? Like hearing that Conor McGregor sold his whiskey company for $600 million. It's not like you're not in the weeds of the deal. You're just hearing that he got paid off of it, right? So I think stuff like that does really well from the kind of the aspect of reaching a wide audience. But yeah, like you said, Darren's kind of been the blueprint for it for a while, and he's obviously built a massive following. So it's clear that it's not maybe as niche as people believed before.
And what does ESPN do? So if you're one of these legacy sports media companies, Pat McAfee's doing 70,000 viewers. You are the new, I'll say it, maybe the new Darren Ravel, maybe not as quite as nerdy, no offense to Darren. Like there's a world where top talent doesn't need these legacy media companies anymore. Why would Pomp, join a media company when Pomp can do Pomp things? Just where do you think that puts them? And if you're ESPN, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a tough question, obviously. I think if they knew the answer, they would do it. But look, I think that Darren's a good example, and I don't want to keep harping on him, but he's a great example on this because it's tough to tell if he would have had that audience when he kind of went to action if he never went to ESPN before, right? So ESPN provided him a massive platform when he first begun to kind of build up that audience, and CNBC also, and then back to ESPN. But those legacy publications, I think, are really, really helpful for establishing you as a kind of a person in the industry early on if you're able to kind of get a good role there. But then, right, the internet's just changed everything from a technology perspective, from an audience perspective. You can just reach anyone. And Twitter's obviously been instrumental in that for myself, for guys like Pat and others. You can, if you're kind of insightful and good and entertaining, you can build up an audience pretty quickly depending on how well it goes and kind of how factors work in your way. But yeah, look, I think the legacy media companies like an ESPN or something like that, they obviously have they're trying to figure it out from a personality perspective. They're hiring a lot of people that played the game and did stuff like that. But I think that it's all about kind of getting these people young and helping them build their platform and working with them and allowing them to do these things outside of their work, right? So build an audience on Twitter. I think that it's really helpful for not only the person, but the brand. But yeah, it's obviously an uphill battle when people kind of can see that they can leave and start a podcast or start a newsletter. And especially as all these tools are being built out for creators right now, right? So as tiring as it is and as much of a grind as it is to write a newsletter every day and tweet and do a podcast like you're doing or whatever it might be, it's getting easier by the day just by all these tools that are being built out. So I think while people complain and they say, hey, look, only 10, 15, 20, 30 people are making really good money on Substack, yeah, maybe that's true now, and it depends on what your thought is on really good money. But that's certainly going to change, right? So they're paying huge upfront salaries to get people over. They're making it easier than ever to kind of monetize your audience. And I think that's the battle that ESPN is going to continue to fight.
You don't have the ESPN masthead in your bio. You had maybe in some ways Pomp was your distribution, your brother Anthony, to give you the distribution that an ESPN would give a normal person back in the day, where that was Darren to ESPN is maybe you to Pomp in the sense that he gave you that top of the funnel and then you took and went with it. What's going to be interesting to me, and you've kept your Substack open, and is do creators, as they want a world where they can make more and more money, increasingly you're going to start creating more and more walled gardens, and that is a world where ESPN still has a voice because they're just they're broadcast everywhere,
Yeah, I agree. I think it's tricky, right? And that's a question I get asked all the time is, paid versus free and kind of that whole angle. But yeah, you're right. ESPN has been aggressively building out ESPN Plus and their subscription kind of network for
that's a good point.
A couple of years now. But it's just
but it's so rates-based. It's tough to be. I just feel like they're being squeezed. It's not the same as the Spotify. And I talked to a record label exec, and he was saying how they're being squeezed because you got the record labels on one side and ESPN has the leagues on one side that they have to pay the tax to broadcast those games. There's just not enough money in that equation for them to keep top talent. I just don't know how they can make it work.
The problem ESPN's facing really is that rights keep getting more and more expensive every year. You're having digital bidders like Amazon come in now who are going to just add to that equation and make them pay up. Their whole kind of economic model of their business is focused on TV rights and live TV, right? So they're trying to grow ESPN Plus at a rate that outpaces the decline of cable. So that's kind of where their focus on ESPN Plus and getting subscribers over and doing exclusive shows and exclusive content with UFC and all that kind of stuff works. But yeah, like from my perspective, I don't know about you, but it's gotten like overbearing the amount of content that's paywalled recently, right? So it's almost every link you click on to some degree has a paywall. And I think like we're going to hit a point where that's just super, super frustrating because you can't, right? Like it's kind of the bundling and unbundling of cable. Everyone has streaming services now, but you're paying more than your cable bill was previously. And I think we're getting that point with, not only sports media, but publications everywhere, right? So, all these different publications have built out their subscription base, and it's getting to the point where it's really tough to find like good articles and good content without having a subscription to like all of these. So we'll see how it goes, but I think that's one advantage where the creator has if you're kind of aggregating that content and doing it on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it a lot in terms of just if Twitter could just have a wallet built into their experience so that I could, pay a subscription to Twitter that is then dispersed to whatever links I click. Because the amount of times I just can't pay for, New York Times, Business Insider, Bloomberg. You just get crushed by these subscriptions, but I would read the content. It's just so paywalled. It's one thing to pay. It's another thing just to even log in and do it. It's just a pain in the ass.
It would be an interesting experiment to see like micropayments on Twitter, right? So like you see an article that you want to read. It's from Bloomberg, Forbes, whatever, and you click on it and it's 50 cents, 99 cents or whatever. Like I wonder how much we would be spending on a monthly basis, right? And you don't, and that's your only way of reading. So you don't need kind of a subscription to each individual service. I would assume it's probably much more, but I guess it depends on how much links you're clicking and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, if you're a sports business and I'm trying to talk about creators, one way they've really intersected, I've noticed, is sports books, where if you're a sports book 5 years ago, you wouldn't see, so Penn invest in Barstool, and that became a landmark move, and that is a very personality-based move. You have Pat and FanDuel. Levitard, I think, just signed with DraftKings. What are your thoughts on what this recent sportsbook moves kind of say about where we are in terms of marketing and sports media?
Look, I think people are it's obvious that they're willing to pay up for this content. I tweeted out yesterday, like, the Penn Barstool deal is like going to go down in history as one of the greatest ever.
I know.
It's unbelievable. And credit to like Dave, he took it really well. He was just like, look guys, they got a great deal. We're making them a shit ton of money. And like, he's obviously incentivized through Penn stock and stuff like that. So it's great, but like,
it hurts me in my heart. It hurts me deep in my core because I know the Barstool business well. And when Barstool was in the lows of COVID, like I'm talking, it was like, I don't know, $3 share price. Maybe I'm inventing that in my head. That I didn't have if I didn't have the conviction to just put all my money on that Penn stock, because I was part of my takes for a sponsor. Like I know the value of that business. So whenever I hear the words Penn and Barstool, it hurts me.
It hurts a little, yeah. And I don't blame you because like, look, any of the kind of the other sportsbook now, whether it's DraftKings, FanDuel, I forget who exactly they met with, but if I remember correctly, Dave was basically like, look, we ran everyone through the numbers. We gave this opportunity to everyone. Penn was one that took us up on the deal. And I would imagine that they would go back and they would do that in a heartbeat now, right? Not only a heartbeat, but they'd probably pay double what Dave and them were asking.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I think it was a good move, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts on it, on these sportsbooks investing in their owned channels. So Penn Barstool out of the equation because that's just a clean media acquisition. But in terms of, all right, like DraftKings is starting their own TV network, I believe. Do you have any thoughts on that? I have some hot takes, but I'll let you go first.
I don't have any on that like network specifically, but what I will say is, so talking to different people kind of in that space and in that industry, one of the common themes is that a lot of these sports books thought they were going to differentiate themselves through kind of the tech, how they do in Europe and other places. And when they got here, like that's just not the case. They're all using the same kind of technology and all that stuff. So what they found out was like it's really high it's a really high cost to acquire a customer. And I think that when you're paying $400, $500, $600 to acquire a customer, and their lifetime value sure is $2,000, $3,000, whatever it is, that deal obviously works out well. But there's a race to the bottom, right? It's how can we acquire these customers the cheapest? And I think what they're all realizing simultaneously now is back to Penn and Barstool. They did a really great job of doing that. They've lowered customer acquisition costs through infiltrating their network. How can we build this at scale ourselves, right? So instead of going out and paying Dan Le Batard $50 million to distribute his podcast for 3 years, how can we create a network where we bring people in through our own medium, have our own voice, and get these customers hooked into us for life, right? And I think that that's probably what they're going to try to do. It sounds like you have an opinion on whether that'll work or not, but I'm not sure. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is every CMO's dream who works at a brand to say, I'm going to build out my own media company. I think it's really hard to do. I think it's much easier to go from a media company to, let's say, commerce or a different angle. I think it's really fucking hard to go from a sports book to a media company. Where I think these sportsbooks may be making a mistake is making talent exclusively on their platforms versus letting the talent build their own platforms. Because I think the leverage game just doesn't work how it used to.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because, like, I don't know the specific of Pat's deal, but his audience is obviously massive. He does, 60, 70 million views on YouTube a month. He has the number one show. So, like, them partnering with him organically and allowing him to kind of go out and build his audience and still distribute the content in the way that he's doing it, I would assume has been a home run for them rather than kind of doing an exclusive deal where they have the rights to distribute all of his content. So even if it's maybe economically good for the creator for 2 to 3 years, they get paid really, really well and they get to distribute their content. Like, I agree. I don't necessarily think it's probably the best for the brand, but we'll see. It seems like a lot of these brands are going to try it anyways.
Yeah, the problem is there's not that many Barstools and there's not that many Pat McAfees. And I think people like to imagine a world where those people exist, but I don't know. Like, I see MGM do a Jamie Foxx deal, and I'm like, to me, that reminds me of the old media move where you get a flashy media star. I love Jamie Foxx. I think he's hilarious, but Jamie Foxx's distribution is what? His Instagram channel? Like, that's, you sign with Pat, you sign with Barstool, you are buying into not only talent and likeness, but distribution. And I think that's what BetMGM, I think, is missing in that partnership. But I could talk about sports books and endorsers all day. Kind of changing topics because I'm interested in how this works. So I don't know which one came first, but I'll start with Portnoy. Portnoy launches the Buzz ETF, and that is this weird, not weird, but this world where suddenly continuing this thread of personalities just dominating, where now a personality is the face of an ETF, which is based, I think, on social sentiment. You did the MVP ETF. How does that work? Like, what do they just say, hey, man, you seem like a pretty good person to promote our ETF. You want to do that and you get a cut of this? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, so Dave's released probably like 2 weeks before us, and we had been working on it for months. So, like, internally I was like, damn, like, just like competitiveness.
It's hard to follow Portnoy's footsteps.
Yeah, and people afterwards are like, oh, the same thing as Portnoy. I'm like, yeah, I got it, thanks. But look, the Round Hill guys, they wrote a guest post for me. I've known them for a long time, and we've just kind of been friendly. I met them on Twitter and kind of how you would imagine, going back and forth. They're super interested in sports and streaming, and the way they kind of market a lot of their ETFs, they have a few different ETFs. They have Bets, which is sports betting. They have Subs, which is streaming. They have a few other ones that have been successful. And they came to me and they're like, hey, look, we'd love to hear your opinion, but we think that professional sports are kind of one of the scarcest and most premium assets. They obviously have a strong record of value appreciation across not only North American leagues, but European soccer and stuff like that. And I'm like, yes, 100%. That's one of my core beliefs. And they're like, look, we want to do an ETF based off of this. So I'm like, okay, I've never done this. Let's figure out how this works and whatnot, right? So I think that it was kind of weird at first and like figuring out how to do it. But at the end of the day, like, they're doing all the back end work. I'm strictly a marketing partner in the ETF, so I have equity in the fund. I've invested money personally myself. So, like, it's like, hey, look, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I'm not. But the tricky part is it's tough in the finance world of like what you can and cannot say and stuff like that, right? So the ETF's done fine performance-wise. And
but you're not a financial advisor. Is that what you're about to say?
So yes, I probably should say that, but it's just tough, right? Like, I can't tweet. I don't know how Dave gets away with half the shit he says, which is just like, that's a
ask questions later. Move fast.
That's a different story for a different day, I guess. But like, it's gone well. I think part of it is just getting as many eyeballs on it as we can, and it's one of those things where just like every other company in the world, they're looking for distribution, right? They're looking for attention, they're looking for eyeballs, and that's what I've tried to provide. So I do newsletter ads for them, just kind of organic. So anytime I write about a company that's in the ETF, so there's companies like, just whoever hasn't seen it, there's companies like the New York Knicks, who are publicly traded, the Atlanta Braves, the Rangers, Manchester United. There's leagues like WWE, there's Nike apparel brands, stuff like that. So it's kind of like an all-encompassing sports ETF. And what I try to do is whenever I write about Nike, their earnings, I write about the Rangers, any kind of sports company that would be in there, I link to the ETF, try to get people interested, stuff like that. I tweet about it here and there. So really what it is it's just marketing. But yeah, I'm a partner in the fund. It's cool. It's been like a unique way to build an alternative revenue stream on the business, I think, right? So I think people are always trying to look for kind of additional things to do, and this is certainly one of them. It's gone well. It's just tough because, like, especially in the sports world, there's probably not a million things you can build off of that. But they're happy, I'm happy, and it's gone well.
I don't know what you're allowed to say, but I'm fascinated by this. What is equity in ETF like? What does that actually mean? You own part of the MVP.
I get carry on the fund, so I get carry on it. So they take kind of a percentage of it. And expense ratio, management, and then I get a piece of that.
Okay, so before I get to my final question, I have to ask, and honestly, I don't really have a hot take here, but I want to know your take.
Yep.
NFTs, athletes, should we care about it? Should we not? Top Shot seems to be not going in the right direction right now for my fellow Top Shot holders. Gronk did an NFT. There seems to be a mix of get rich quick schemes and things that are just that seem smarter. What is your take on NFTs and, athletes?
So let's start with, I don't really have a hot take either, but let's start with NFTs, kind of the overview. I think that one of the cool things that NFTs have done is there was never a free market for intellectual property before, right? So we just didn't know what it was worth, what it would trade at, et cetera. And I think that's what NFTs have provided, right? So when you have that art, the technology, and the intellectual property meeting kind of in a free market, we'll do price discovery and we'll figure out what they are. And I think what we saw was kind of what's traditional is it's very volatile at first, right? Some things are trading, people did the $69 million sale. Some things are cheap, obviously, and we'll see a leveling off. The part that I think is cool, which I think probably a lot of people mention this now, which is like the secondary market, right? You're able to monetize it through further transit.
See, that's where it clicked for me. If, I make a painting tomorrow, and I'm a pretty good painter, not at all. If I painted something, I could sell it, and then I could own those future earnings. And I think that is where it clicked for me. It hasn't clicked for me in the sense that I look at, no offense to Gronk, I kind of get where Top Shot is because it's a platform and these are moments built on the platform into a marketplace. But if you're building these NFTs on a kind of its own ecosystem a little bit, I don't quite understand what we're doing here. And it a little bit feels like a get rich quick scheme, but I don't know.
I've had some of the same feelings, I think, regarding like kind of athletes and NFTs.
And believe me, get your fucking money. I'm not like Gronk. If you can sell an NFT, sell the fucking NFT. That's not me shitting on him.
I think that's part of it, though, right? Is that they're meeting their fans in the digital world, right? So if Gronk has fans in the digital world, why shouldn't he create a product and sell it to them, right, and market it to them? It's just kind of reconnecting with your fan base. And, people are buying them for a reason. They're determining what the value is. So, and the other part of it is, like, we've seen, like, Patrick Mahomes got shit for doing his NFTs. He donated the money to charity, right? So, like, I think a lot of athletes have done that and have been maybe less quiet about it or whatnot. But right, I just think if your fans are in the digital world, you want to create a product for them, you want to connect with them, you want to be known as that kind of forward-thinking, innovative athlete, then it makes sense. I think what we've seen recently is it's not going as well probably for other athletes as they imagined. Kind of whether it's the college graduates trying to mint NFTs now that they're out of amateur athleticism, or whether it's kind of the second tier or the second wave of athletes trying to do NFTs. I think the demand has certainly gone down a little bit. And it's the same thing with Top Shot, right? You mentioned before. Top Shot, I think, has built an incredible platform, and I think they're probably here to stay, not only from the amount of intellectual capital and venture capital that's flowing into it, I think is obviously impressive, kind of the investors and who's putting in the money. The partnership with the NBA is super attractive, right? So it's an additional revenue stream. I don't want to quote him wrong, but I believe Mark Cuban said that he thinks it could be maybe a top 3, 4, or 5 revenue stream for the NFL or for the NBA long term. So that's obviously important. They get a percentage of every peer-to-peer transaction. So that's cool. But I think the thing that Top Shot experienced was there was at one point, I think there was like 200 to 300,000 people in line to buy packs. and only 10,000 people could withdraw money from the platform,
Yeah.
which like, I understand that it's you're trying to figure it out and it's been beta and all of that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a hater. Like, I understand that. I get it. But at the same time, like, where's the price going to go if you're keeping money in a confined space and you can't take any out, right? So like, yeah, people could sell their kind of moments and keep it in their account and wait to cash out, but you know, people aren't doing that, right? Like, it's what a casino does. You get money in a confined space, it encourages spending, and things go up. So I think that what we're seeing now is as more people are able to withdraw, the market settles down a little bit, the hysteria and the kind of marketing of it through other publications, we're seeing it level out. But look, I think it's going to go through everything else. I think there's going to be volatility. I think it's probably here to stay long term, especially through a partnership with the NBA. It's just a matter of like, where do these prices go in the next 6 months, 2 years, 5 years? I'd imagine just like anything else, if you have a long time horizon, you'll probably be fine. But the people that are trying to get rich quick and flip things and do that nature probably won't be making out too well.
Yeah, that's like me and my Dogecoin investment. I have this innate ability to buy at the peak hysteria and then not just hold, because I'm just investing in a meme. Like I know
Trying to make money.
Yeah, I'm trying to make money and everything I make money in, and I'm not nearly as deep in crypto as you, but things that I actually believe in. If you actually believe in them, you don't have the conviction. You freak out when Bitcoin or Ethereum drops 5-10% in a day. Whereas when like Dogecoin goes down, and I'm gonna have to explain to my wife why I wasted $3,000 on a coin built on a dog that has no intrinsic value and is completely a meme, you start to panic sell. But I digress.
The part where I get concerned is people thinking that Dogecoin is going to be the money of the future and kind of pumping it up like that. And trust me, I'm all for the memes and the stuff like that. I think it's incredible. But yeah, people obviously need to be careful for sure.
Yeah, I mean, my investment philosophy on Dogecoin, which is not what this podcast is about, but I'm going to put it here, is you are investing in a meme. And if you once I grounded myself in that, I'm like, all right, I'm willing to buy in now because I don't think this meme is going to go away. It's going to go down and then it's going to pop back up in 3 years. It's like an NFT of a meme, but not really. Like, you are buying just a internet meme.
Yeah.
And if you're okay with that.
I love the way that Elon Musk positioned it also. He was basically like, it could be in some crazy world, like the funniest one and the stupidest one works out the best, and that is the currency, right? And I think like to some degree that's true, right? It's like if we make enough jokes about it, it eventually becomes true. But yeah, it's certainly incredible to see, whether it's the GameStop thing or Dogecoin or whatever. It's cool to see people investing in memes.
Well, I'm going to land this plane. I'm going to bring us back to the point, which is you and what you've built. So I asked this question to a lot of people, and usually they've been doing this. I think the guest that's going to go live tomorrow has been doing YouTube for 13 years. So back when you literally couldn't make money on YouTube, you couldn't even change your thumbnail. You've been doing this since July. Have you made any mistakes? Has anything gone wrong where you said this was a deviation from the path? I wish I didn't do this.
It's a good question. I think I make mistakes every day, right? Like,
yeah,
small
everyone
mistakes.
says that. But
no, I do though. Small mistakes though, for sure. Whether it's saying something in the wrong opinion or voice that I didn't mean to, or pissing someone, stupid stuff like that, for sure. But I think like the biggest point for me, and it's super cliche to say, was just getting started. I think I'd have to go back and check, but I think I created my Substack. I'm not even kidding. Like 2 years ago. Like
the inertia to get started. It's a great point.
And I didn't write on it for a year, right? And I messed around on it. I built out some templates. I was like, oh, what if I did this? Or what? You just think about it way too much and get in your own head. But part of it was just like the fear of starting. And once I started, things have obviously gone well. And like, not necessarily that I didn't think they would, or I was discouraged that they might not go well. But like, just that pain point of actually doing it was the key. And I'm sure everyone believes this in some point of like, whether it's imposter syndrome or whatever it might be, it's just getting started. And I wish now looking back, I would have done that even earlier. I'm happy I did it now. But every day it's just like, thinking about the future of what can I be doing forward and thinking and building to grow this business. And I think that's probably like the thing I think about the most.
Yeah. I had the same moment where it was like, I read Twitter all the time. I'm addicted to it. I have opinions. Why don't I just start tweeting? Then you kind of like build it up in your head and you hate all your tweets. Then you realize, okay, if I start tweeting, my tweets are going to suck, but eventually they might get better. And then with this podcast, I built this thing up in my head for 2 years. I talked to your brother about it, and his advice was the same. It's like, yeah, it's probably going to suck to start, but it's going to get better. And like, you can't you build it up in your head so much. Well, I have to have the perfect sound equipment, the perfect camera, the perfect guests. that you might never actually do it. So I completely agree with you. But 5 years from now, what are you, the king of sports business? What are we doing? We're raising a fund and investing in and SPACing a company. Like, what are we doing?
I mean, I think, like the main focus now is the content side still. I think like the investing stuff will come once you have that large audience and the distribution, right? I think it's still probably a little too early for that kind of stuff, but at least for the next 6, 12, 18 months, it's just head down building the content stuff and ancillary channels, whether it's the YouTube or the podcast or
are you
whatever
gonna,
it might be.
What's your next move? You have the blog, you have the Twitter. What's the next move?
I think it's going to be YouTube, but we'll see here shortly.
All right, everyone, that is the episode. I hope you liked it. I'm going to do a quick outro. One thing that I'm really hung up on or still thinking about is this idea of credentials. And no one asks Joe who he works for now. They don't say, how do you have the authority to talk about sports business? You don't work for ESPN. You don't work for Fox Sports. You don't work for one of these established media companies. And on one hand, that is awesome. Joe did not have to work his way up the ESPN ladder and all that, all that effort just to one day have the opportunity to really get his voice out there. He was able to produce great content, get traction, and go. But the negative is the world is noisier than ever. If everybody can produce content, if there are no filters, the world is incredibly noisy, and it may be harder in the future for the great content to bubble up to the surface. So there's obviously a pro and a con here, but in Joe's case, I think it's amazing that a guy can go from the desk of, JP Morgan to now one of the larger sports business influencers in the world. All right, everyone, that's my thought leadering. Enough of me. If you liked the episode, please be sure to subscribe and give me a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, comment, subscribe, do all those things. And I'll see you next week.